Hello, I'm David D. Hilster. I am a critical thinker, dissident scientist, and I'm here to tell you the truth about science, something your university professors won't tell you, the mass media won't tell you, and of course those science evangelists won't tell you. Today is a special treat. It's really my first interview on my channel, and with a gentleman who I just met in, I believe, July of this year in beautiful, beautiful Vancouver. I met him at our social night, and he came up to me and expressed interest in giving a talk. And he said he was going to do it on the mind and consciousness. And right away I go, oh no, a new age wave guy. And it turned out this guy was nothing like that. He was a super surprise. I was really extremely impressed. And the next day he gave a talk, and I was even more impressed. And now he is coming out with a book, but his name is George S. Coyne. You can see here this cover here. I took the liberty and changed his cover here and put his nice face there. And Notfinity Process. He is obviously an author, a scientist, and he also works with special needs kids, autism, some of them high functioning, I guess, where some of them actually like what he's doing and like to read about pretty heady stuff. But I'm really pleased to have him here. You are in Vancouver, Canada, is that correct?
Right, just out of the suburb of Vancouver. It's called Delta, BC.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your book, and why this is such a, one of the things is I think one of the things about my readers, my subscribers are going to say, well, why are we going to talk about consciousness in the book? But the truth is in your book is not only about the mind and consciousness in a way that's very much like computer programmers, and I'm a computer programmer, so I really like it. It's nothing new wave. This is really feet on the ground. But you also talk about problems with the Big Bang in the book, correct? And maybe at the end, I'd even like to talk with you about, we have some good conversation about dissident science and mainstream science. So that's what we want to sort of do today. But the first half of this is going to be talking about this really great book called Notfinity Process. So George, can you introduce yourself and your book here?
The book, as I say, is called Notfinity Process, subtitled Microcosms-in-Motion. And just quickly to explain what I mean by notfinity is I created that word because the concept of infinity has got so corrupted, it's impossible to imagine what infinity is, because the minute you try to imagine it, it's concrete. It's not infinite because it's therefore
sort of blows your mind.
Yeah, you can't. So what I'm saying by the word notfinity is simply to don't even try to imagine the infinite. Just realize that this universe that I'm describing is not finite. And the microcosms in motion, everything in the universe is a microcosm. Whether you're talking about atoms or planets or galaxies or clusters of galaxies, they're all microcosms, and they go on without end.
Yeah, and I think maybe we can talk a little bit about here, because we have common ground here, because we have a particle model, my father and I, and it's based on who? Glenn Borchart, and of course Glenn Borchart is the infinity man.
Right.
And that's a lot of the terminology you're using is from Borchart's work. Is that correct?
Right. He uses the word infinite, and I use the word not finite, but it's basically the same thing, just a different way of conceiving of it.
Right.
And he had input into. He read the original copy of the book, and I'm really grateful to comments he made for the book, which I was able to incorporate a lot of them, and I've cited him a lot in my book.
No, absolutely, and that's why when you see microcosms in motion and notfinity and affinity, that's, obviously we both stand on the shoulders of the great scientist Glenn Borchart. So, yeah, that's very exciting. So, tell us a little bit in detail about. Give us an overview of what this book. If somebody's to pick this up, what are they going to be reading?
Well, it's I discuss illusions in physics, such as matterless motion. I think that's something that Einstein came up with. The idea you can have motion that's separate from matter. It's total nonsense. So I discussed that. Nonsense like wave-particle duality, superposition, probability waves, cosmological expansion, inflation, Schrodinger's cat. I think if people are familiar with physics, they've heard of Schrodinger's cat. The cosmos needing observers. That to me is the most insane concept. That they're saying if everybody were to die tonight of a plague, the universe would cease to exist because it requires us, our incredible observation, to make the universe exist. I mean, that's got to be total nonsense.
A lot of that comes from quantum mechanics now, right?
Yeah. That's pure quantum mechanics.
That stuff is so. I mean, you think particle physics is bad, which it is on a scale of 1 to 10. It's a 9 out of 10 and bad scale. Quantum mechanics goes beyond 10.
It's beyond Alice, through the looking glass kind of stuff. It's just total nonsense. And so I discussed quantum mechanics, and I say why it can't be. For years they've been trying to unite them. Unify them with relativity, and they're both flawed. They're both ridiculous. So it's ridiculous to try to unite them. But the interesting thing about quantum mechanics, when people talk to people like Richard Feynman and the elite in this, he's one of the greatest in quantum mechanics. When you say to him things like, "Well, this is absurd," their answer is, "No, our theory's not absurd. The universe is absurd." This is nonsense.
Yeah. I actually did a talk about that where it says, the universe doesn't owe us any coherent type of explanation, or I'm totally off on that what it was, but it comes down to that what it means is that the models that they come up don't make sense, and then instead of saying okay they don't make sense and maybe in the universe should make sense, they throw it onto the universe and said doesn't have an obligation to make sense to you. That's what he said. It was a t-shirt from our famous Tyson deGrasse, Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Neil deGrasse Tyson. I mentioned him in my book, and I mentioned the idea of one of the a few months ago, and this is in the book. These people came up with this proof. They said that it is massively impossible. These scientists, physicists, it's massively impossible for the universe to exist. Based on based on our accepted scientific models. If you use the Big Bang model, relativity, it is massively, not just impossible, massively impossible. And I say this is nonsense. Rather than saying that the theory is wrong, they say it's impossible for the universe to exist.
Yeah,
the theory is impossible.
Yeah, and that goes along with what I keep telling a lot of my listeners all the time. I say, look, it's not that when people come up to us and say you haven't gone to the university, you don't understand it because you haven't studied it, you're not smart enough. I say it's not, the problem isn't that we're not smart enough. The problem is they're unintelligible. That is, their models are impossible to reconcile. So it's not, and what they do is they end up capitulating, meaning, well, if I'm going to be in that position, I'm going to pretend I understand it, even though no one can. So, but anyways, tell me a little bit about the, this is great stuff because everything you're talking about is right on it. Tell me about the mind part of mind and consciousness.
Before you get to that, do you want me to just let me finish some of this other stuff?
Oh no, absolutely. Sorry.
I discuss invalidating problems in relativity, such as the non-scientific objectification of motion, violations of scientific assumptions, and profound math errors, Einstein's errors. And I show that the Big Bang Theory is, I falsify it with 61 proofs. You only need one. Borchart wrote a blog recently saying, most people, if they come up with one thing to falsify theory, that's enough. I've come up with 61.
Well, you know what? It's really interesting is because we're working on this, and I have you as one of the editors, and that's exactly why. One of the things is when I talk, I was interviewed yesterday on a YouTube with Gary Mosher, and he had mentioned, he says we have to separate in our presentation of work, critical thinkers' work, what we do. We have to separate the bringing down and criticism of mainstream from our scientists and their own work, and one of the things I absolutely want you to do is we have on this new website, which is coming in the next few months, flaws, and we're going to literally list them and put a face to them. So I expect you to be very prominent in our what I call mainstream flaws area.
I'll be doing that. Now, the other thing I describe is Glenn Borchart's infinite universe theory and his universal cycle theory that he wrote with Stephen Pitts,
Yes.
who's a very good mathematician. So it's the neo-mechanical gravitational theory.
Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah.
You know Steve Bryant, he's a good friend of mine.
Yep.
I examined his modern mechanics theory.
Yes.
And Duncan Shaw, who you know, a former Supreme Court justice in BC, and who's now doing a lot of physics papers and getting them published. I examined his entanglement explanation, which I think is the best I've ever seen, and his ether gravity model. I know you're not an ether supporter, but so you might not support that, but it's in the book too.
No, that's great. That's great. People can actually read about, that's one of the things that's very different, George, that people don't understand about our group and what we do. We're not just scientists working outside the mainstream. We are scientists that work together. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we don't, but that doesn't preclude us from helping each other.
And the interesting thing, in this book, I've got Glenn's gravitational theory, Glenn Borchart's, and I've included Duncan Shaw's, even though they differ, because I'm saying they're both really good, and I'll let the reader decide which one they want to go with, but they're both very good. I'm not going to say which side I'm on it, but there's similarities to it, and there's differences, and maybe there's a combination of both that will be. Maybe it can work out eventually that it'll be a combination, but I definitely like Glenn's neo-mechanical gravitational theory. It's great, but then there's also good things in Duncan's. So in the chapter, I discuss, a Bohm, of course. I discussed this.
Yes.
Yeah, I consider him the greatest, David Bohm, the greatest physicist of the 20th century. So I've got a chapter on his ideas, using a lot from Causality and Chance book. I talk about pilot waves, the undivided universe. I include letters from a fellow that worked with him for 30 years, Dr. Basil Hiley, who I've communicated with over the years. And he actually gave me some information he said I could use letters that he sent to me in the book. And when I showed him how I was presenting his work, he made some recommendations on how to adjust what I had, So that's in the book. I got letters from the great David Peat in the book, who he actually encouraged me 3 years ago, to expand on my consciousness blog that he saw. And that became a chapter in the book. And I dedicated the book to him also, David Peat, great man. Other topics are a rational explanation for the double slit experiment, Maxwell's ether, energy, dark matter candidates, and the cosmological principle, alternatives to galactic redshift interpretation, cosmological expansion, and inflation myths. Now here's where we get to consciousness that you brought up a while ago. My whole point in consciousness, they've been trying to explain it for thousands of years, and they got all this mumbo jumbo about it, and all this nonsense that goes on. And I'm saying, look, just look at it this way. And I've got the support of a major neuroscientist on this. He sees it the same way. The functioning brain is consciousness. It's not that even that the brain produces consciousness. When it's functioning, that is consciousness. And the key to why this is so important is if a person thoroughly understands that and puts it into their daily life, the sense of conflict between opposing desires in their own mind, in their own brain, ceases. It's something that to be examined. Like, let's say if somebody smokes cigarettes. Okay, they've got their desire to smoke, but then they've got another desire to not smoke because it's killing them. So they get opposing that conflict. And I'm saying if a person can understand that the functioning brain is consciousness, it gets rid of this conflict, because the conflict is becoming from the idea that we think there's a little entity in our head that is me, that is running everything. And brain studies show that doesn't actually go on. The brain is simply making decisions, and then after we think, the ego is making them, when it doesn't. So there's the conflict, because the brain identifies with this ego rather than just functioning. But it's something that it's thoroughly explained in the book. I mentioned it in the talk I gave in July too.
Yeah, I'm going to put a link to it for sure in our description section on your talk. It was really, really interesting. And again, I thought it is tough to think about the brain. I know myself, when I was living in Brazil many years ago in the late 80s, I would remember being in a hammock and saying, okay, if I were to replace my brain piece by piece with something that works just like it,
Yeah, I know.
am
Yeah,
I still there? Am I still there? And in this idea that, if I've frozen and then I come alive, and it happens when you do operations. You really sort of, you're sort of almost turned off, but your brain activity still goes on. But even that, if it comes back, what is you? What is consciousness? And I think that's from what I guarantee my subscribers out there, this book, and you can see him, George, talk on this. It is not at all anything that's, the magical words and weirdness of New Age anything. This is really
oh,
feet on the ground. I mean, it was very stimulating. It is tough. It is. My father, who is a brilliant man, I work with him constantly on our model, the particle model. I had a 3-hour conversation, one of the best in my life, just a couple days ago on light, gravity, diffusion. What mechanical explanation can we have in our model, because everything's mechanical for the light diffusion, and we have several ideas. But what's amazing is he's a brilliant mind, but thinking about the mind is not real easy. He listened to your talk, and he's a person that takes a while to get something that's that out there. I think I got it, and people like, for instance, Steve Bryant will get it, because if we know computer programs and work in that kind of world, it's a lot easier for some reason.
and Lori, who's at the talk too,
Yeah.
she got it because she's into. I think the computer scientists. One of the
Yeah.
models I talk about in the book is called the computational model of mind, and
Right.
I use that and then I build on. But I also put it in language that the everyday
Sure.
person can understand. Like I used that example. Remember in the conference talk where I said you take a bunch of vegetables, you chop them all up, and then you add some some oils and stuff, and then you've got what? You've got a salad, right? But it's not that the vegetables produce the salad. It's just that we're calling it a salad the same way the brain is functioning. The brain is thinking and emoting and analyzing. And then we, human beings, call that consciousness as if it's, but it's not the brain is producing it. That's just the word we put on it. Just like the word salad, we put on the word vegetables. They haven't produced a salad. We're calling it that. So everything I do that. And the same thing when I talk about this thing about entanglement, which is, I'm sure you're familiar with quantum entanglement. And
Yeah, absolutely.
it's a myth. And I use the simple analogy that you take it's not that it's got faster than light communication between these distant objects, when they've been originally associated. I say you take it like you take a pebble and you drop it in a pond, or take a bowling ball, some massive object. Now you got ripples on each side, which happen to be mirror images of each other. It's not that they're communicating with each other to be mirror images. That's what happens. And so I use analogies like that to make difficult concepts seem rational. But the quantum entanglement thing to me is total nonsense.
Well, yeah, I mean, in the particle model, we talk about quantum mechanics, the entanglement. What happens is they think they're shooting one photon, and they're not. They think they're shooting one electron, and they're not. Right. They're actually in the particle model. It's a little different from the ether model. We have in our model one electron is not one electron. If you even look at the atomic the periodic table, there's the electrons, everything doesn't fall into these neat unit categories. So when they think they're shooting one photon, in our model, they're shooting lots of particles. Oh, yeah. If you're shooting lots of particles, guess what? They're going in all the directions, and you're not. They think they're shooting one, and that's where the problem starts with them. So there are many different explanations, and I think it's I want to talk. I want to.
You know what that is? That's two problems. It's assumptions and it's interpretations. And my book talks a lot about that. That's where the problem in science is going on. We're assuming things that we shouldn't be assuming, and then we're interpreting data in ways that are completely bogus, and then we're saying, there, we've got the proof.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we say it a little differently with the particle model. What we say is that the problem is they have no model. So when they talk about light and gravitation and electromagnetism and magnetic fields and electricity and even the matter that it's being in, they have no models for it. They have conceptual things that they call it a photon, but it's a wave and a particle. Right there, they're starting out with a model that is no model. They call it the standard model, but there isn't a model. But one of the things I did want to sort of segue into as we go here, because
Sure.
we can be talking, is I have a master's in linguistics, and of course if you have a master's in linguistics, you will know this name, Noam Chomsky. You also be very, very aware of the way people use words, and I certainly am. And so I get on people's cases, just like Glenn Borchart would get mad at me because he thought that I knew the answer before he gave his talk. He has this famous thing where he puts up a picture of a dog, and then he asks the audience, what is this? And of course, I'm a linguist. I work with computers and human language. I've been in artificial intelligence for 35 years. We try to get computers to understand stuff. So we think about this all the time. I said, that's easy. That's a picture of a dog. And he'd get mad at me because I know what he's going after, and that is language is really, 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 really important. Yet, that's exactly why you get the new waivers, who are, in my opinion, are just as the particle physicists are just as bad. They use language in a mishmash way. They trade nouns for verbs for adjectives. They call things that, like you said, motion as something as an object, energy as something as thing. I did a little spiel today that charge is not a real thing. It's something we label. We put. In fact, who started that was Benjamin Franklin. But what I'm saying is you and I are very sensitive to that. So is Glenn Borchart on the vocabulary, and that's sort of ironic because not only are we sensitive, but Noam Chomsky, who is I know somebody that you greatly admire, and I certainly do too.
Well, I got a message from his wife after she read my
yes, she told me. That's why.
She said that is something I've got to get Noam to read.
Right.
I don't know how many stacks of papers he's got, but I haven't heard back from him. That was a couple of weeks ago. But she was impressed. Within 20 minutes, at 1 a.m, she emailed me back saying, "Thank you so much for that paper." And then other people in our organization say, "Well, I went to MIT, the same place as Chomsky, and I haven't been able to reach him yet after years."
Right. No, let's hope so. I mean, what we need is eventually someone with a name to be on our side, because once they do, and if we have things up there, that's why it's really important. That's the reason I'm doing this whole YouTube channel, and the reason I'm interviewing a person like you. You are, even though I met you a very short time ago, but I mean, we seem, the way we talk, we have like old souls that seem to know what we're both talking about, and we clicked right away. But the idea now is we've got to get this out. We got to continue to do that. And you having Chomsky, if he has a chance of reading your stuff, let's hope for it. Let's hope for it.
He'll read it. And one of the things that I mentioned to his wife is, one of the things on a video of his that he was watching, he was saying identical things to what I'm saying about the brain cannot be conscious of its own functioning. And that's what the key point in my book. I said, hey, we're on the same wavelength there. And I didn't put that in the original paper, but I put it into the email to her saying, I quoted him on that I got it into the book, but it wasn't, after the paper, I made sure that got into the book. He's saying a very similar thing about that and that's why I'm saying that this ultimate sense of self-awareness, it's an illusion, because if the self is simply, or ego is simply a program in the brain can't be aware of that anymore, of that functioning any more than it can be aware of how it drives a car, the program that enables you to drive a car. We know that program is there. You can't actually see it. You just know it's there. And so, in a sense, the idea of when people say the self is going to be aware of itself is nonsense, because it's like the program for driving a car is going to be aware of itself, because the self is just a program within the brain. So it can't be. Right. I can explain it more thoroughly.
You have. I think what's important to remember, I'll just sort of interject here because I've listened to you talk. People are going to have to give themselves time with this.
God, I've been working at this for 45 years since I was it's the same thing when I talk about time is motion. I mean, that's completely alien to people. Glenn understands it completely, and he talks about it in his book. And that's how I originally got to know Glenn, is because I was along the lines of time is motion, and then I started Googling it, and I found him many years ago that he was writing about it. So we became good friends from the idea that the idea of time is totally mixed up. You know, you got matter and you got motion, matter in motion, and the motion of that matter is what we call time. Just like the Earth goes around the sun and it rotates, that motion is what's occurring. To call it time, we should drop the word time and just say we got motion.
Well, time is, you know what I think is myself, my father, you, Borchart, we're all on the same page. I just think it depends. Sometimes we come up with better explanations sometimes, because here's one of the explanations that my father and I talk about when we talk about time. It really is a concept we've come up with to try to use to measure motion. I mean, that's really what it is. It's not a thing.
I've replaced the word time for the measurement of motion in the book. I call it nadal. And I talked with Steve Bryant, him and Glenn, for quite a while. We used to email back and forth. And he was saying, well, why do we need a new word? I said, you do. I believe he came around to my view that it is to have a separate word. So I use the word nadal for the measurement of that motion. You know, like what clocks do. Clocks measure the rotation of the Earth, 24 hours. And so, and then if we use the word time, we should always realize that that is referring to motion. It's not referring to, like Einstein asked him, what's time? Oh, time is what clock measures. I mean, good God, that's no
right. And I think one of the things I hear people say, and I've had this in the comments below on my YouTube channel here, is people will say, no, well, time is one of those things that it's a constant. It ticks on.
Oh,
well, I know. I'm not saying. What I'm saying is, we know that's wrong, and what I'm saying to people here is, give yourself, of course I'm going to use this in a linguistic way, give yourself time, I hate that, I'm sorry, but give yourself some time to think about it, to let it process in your brain, because you're not going to necessarily get it right away. Sometimes when you say that to a person, just they don't get it, and they'll come up to you months later. I've had that happen with many different types of things. But yes, you have to think about it. What you are talking about consciousness, what time is motion and time, those things you really have to get. I'll give you another one, talking on the same line from my father's side. I was telling him, because I knew Borchart way before my father did, and my father was working, and he broke this wave particle duality wide open with waves of particles. That broke it open. And then when I started to put the stuff I knew from Borchart together, we started to say, okay, hey Dad, mass is always in motion, and there's always small. He just right, because my dad is a true critical thinker. He's really amazing. He's a really brilliant mind. But he came back to me probably months later, maybe a year later. He goes, yeah, mass is always in motion. That's absolute truth. So he had to put all the things that he had learned, and him being a critical thinker, he's an engineer, an electrical engineer, which I find electrical engineers to be some of the best scientists out there. And he he thought about it, and that's what I'm trying to say to my audience here, my subscribers. Guys, think about it, guys and girls, think about it. Don't just listen and expect yourself to understand this. Even what you're saying, that consciousness is what we call the thinking brain, the functioning brain. If it takes you a while to get to that point. The same way as we talk about in our CNPS for 25 years, that there's a time dilation, that somehow time. I mean, if you think about, I know, but you talk about that, don't you? You talk about time dilation.
The other thing too, I'll point out to you, in my own life, I am very, and when I was teaching in an alternate private school for about a year and a half with students, I'm very careful in the way I use language. Like most people would say, it takes a year for the Earth to go around the sun. And I say, no, we term one revolution around the sun a year. It's not taking time. It doesn't take time for the Earth to rotate on its axis. We call one rotation of the Earth on its axis, human beings, we call that a day. It's not that it takes a day. There is no day for it to take. The day doesn't exist as time. It's simply when the Earth is completes one rotation. That's what we call a day. So I always catch people when I'm talking, when I'm hearing that, and they say, no, it's not. And when I taught at the science course, I was in the alternate school. I was in the private school. I was very careful to make sure. And when I talked about gravity, you wouldn't believe the nonsense they've got in these textbooks about gravity.
I know.
I couldn't. I had to correct almost everything.
It's so hard. I know my daughter in the 5th grade brought a 5th grade science book home, and I'm starting to read, and we had to read through it, and I'm going, oh my gosh, this is not. And I mean, I was just amazed at how many bad assumptions, bad use of language, objectifying things, meaning we take nouns, make them into verbs into nouns, all those kinds of things. And then my daughter, poor daughter, she comes home and she goes, Dad, I need help now with my homework in science. And she already, before I even start, she goes, I know, you don't agree with anything, but I've got to take the test.
I was in this position where I turned down a job. I was offered a job tutoring grade 11 physics, and I said, let me see the text. I got a copy of the textbook, and after I spent 1 or 2 lessons with it, I said, I can't do this. I mean, there's so much stupid information in here.
Yeah.
If they just want to teach Newtonian physics, great, that's fine. But you believe that? I said, no, I'm going to be constantly arguing with what is in the text, but the kid needs to graduate, so he has to repeat the nonsense. And I said, no, I can't ethically teach that because it's just, so I stepped away. I said, no, I won't teach that physics course.
Yeah, one of the things, George, that we talk about, in fact, on the new website I put there, is that universities are failing in science. They're absolutely failing. And I always say and I'm here again, hey, subscribers, if any of you out there are millionaires or billionaires, we need to start a new university with critical thinking, because it would be very different, and it's something that really I truly believe that it's been thousands of years. I don't think there's ever been a critical thinking university ever. I think we see past people talk about it. For instance, Newton, but we don't read. There's only a few books, and I've seen them. Newton spent the rest of his life as the head of the mint, arguing his theories and ideas with his peers. Newton wasn't living in a place where everyone threw up and says, "Oh, no, he's solved the world. Let's change paradigm shift." They all went to their graves thinking he was crazy, most of them. And so, but we don't see it that way. But we need to teach this differently, and that's one of the reasons we have our Wikipedia, and we're trying to do that. We're trying to say, okay, we have the place in the world where we can build a whole new scientific encyclopedic repository that could actually be for the critical thinker and have all the problems and all the different solutions. I mean, it's very frustrating. One other thing I want to mention too is I know 2 teachers. One's a high school teacher in I think it was in New Jersey. Another one's a Brazilian friend of mine who's a university professor in engineering across the bay in Rio. Both of those teachers got themselves into the effect. One was the high school teacher was trying to give critical thinking to his students and saying, look, we can't just accept it. And what happened after a while, it was so frustrating that we had a long talk. He just talked my ear off. This was 20 years ago. He said to me, I no longer talk about that. I just tell them, we will study it, we will have tests on it. But he said, what he does now, he says, do not, under any circumstance, become a physicist or a theoretical physicist. He reduced it down to literally saying, what I can do is say, do something else, anything else but that. And then the guy in Brazil was actually teaching his students to critically think. And he would, being an engineer, he says, pick a topic. And some people would pick the Big Bang. Some people would pick relativity. He would then say, I want, and I will give you a bad grade if you do not look at for and against these theories. What he said, he was doing that for probably 3 or 4 years, and I was all excited about it. I talked to him 2 years ago on the phone saying, let's start using this as a model where we can maybe get the rest of the world to start doing this too. You know what happened during that phone call? He says, I can't do that anymore. And he said, a third of my students think this is great. A third of my students don't care, all they want is a grade. The other third of the students are now going to my bosses and my directors and the ombudsman in the university saying I am teaching blasphemy.
Well, you know, that reminds me of that video that film you made about Einstein wrong,
Yeah.
where they're going and talking to these university students, and you're saying, now, if you're in your work, if you, in the future, if you discovered a major problem with relativity, and you knew you had the proof that this is wrong, what would you do? And half of them said, oh, well, they wouldn't want to jeopardize their career because they got to pay their rent, and they know what would happen to them. They're going to be blacklisted, so they would keep it quiet.
Yeah, those were high school students at Poly.
High
Yeah, and I mean, it was funny because the sophomores were a little lost. The juniors, because they weren't graduating and looking at exactly the universities yet, they were gun-ho. You kidding? If it was wrong, I'd fight for it.
Right.
The seniors,
they were more realistic.
they were going like, you know, I could fight it and do all that, but I want my position at MIT, so guess what? I'm not going to do that.
I got to pay my bills, and I'll be ruined if I do it. Look at the Halton C. Arp. I mean, the famous astronomer, when he started saying about the photos he was coming up with on quasars. I mean, he had to go
linked. Yeah, they were linked to galaxies, and that, of course, just blew away the redshift because, you know, they were supposed to be at totally different speeds.
But that university thing, I've also been recently thinking about that, where, you know, they've got this thing in Lee Smolin, the physicist Lee Smolin, who's a mainstream physicist. He set up founded the Perimeter Institute, which is, of course, more along the orthodox lines, and that's associated with the University of Waterloo, my old university. They give the degrees from University of Waterloo to the students there. I'm thinking if some kind of program could be set up somewhere where a university would grant the degrees based on people who are doing critical thinking, you know, and encouraged to be critical thinkers in a science program. You know, that's what I was thinking. That would be wonderful. If critical thinkers university. How's that for a title?
No, absolutely, absolutely. And it's something that I think that can happen, especially with today. The problem is obviously resources, because we don't have machines doing everything and we're not all free to do whatever we want. We've got to make livings. So that's one of the problems.
It would have to be small, like maybe 30 students when you start out with, and you know.
Well, we'd have to have a person that would be absolutely dedicated to be able to do that. I mean, you'd have to have somebody with, you know, be able to make a living, you know, and that's tough. So in all this, what is it? Because your book covers an awful lot.
That's what when the publisher originally read it a year ago, they said, "Holy smokes, you got a lot of material, and you can't just go through this. You got to really think about every single page that a person reads is something to think about for quite a while."
How many pages is your book?
It's the publisher's got it listed as 366, although it's precisely 365, and there's no wasted pages. Like when I end one chapter, I don't put blank pages, or end one chapter, I go right to the next page. And you know, a lot of books, they got like maybe 12 pages and they're just blank pages. I'm making sure that I'm not wasting any pages there. That goes from one page.
And when did you start writing the book?
I believe it was March of 2015, and I thought it was all done by the summer of 2016, and I put in even more time since 2016 on editing. After I thought it was done, it's gone through major amounts of editing. It's gone through my copy editor. It's gone through Steve Bryant read it. I think he read it twice. Glenn Borchart was the first to read it, and then also Bruce Nappy, who's one of the members he's on the board as I am with CNPS. He read it to see if there's anything that scientists can pick apart, you know, and if I'd used a term wrong or anything like that. So that was helpful because when I was talking about the word aware, he said, "Oh, they're going to get you. You got to use it the way that most people use it." Right. So he made some valuable suggestions, and you wouldn't believe the amount of editing that goes into. I guess you probably do. It's just amazing how much the editing. It's something I'd like to point out as an answer, to when they say, "Well, quantum mechanics must be right." Here's the solution I've got, and I've seen this a lot. They'll say, "Well, if quantum mechanics isn't right, how do you explain that your cell phone works?" And here's my answer to that. Imagine if we had this concept that there's a giant that lives at the center of the earth that's 10,000 feet tall or something. And for him, a year is just a second. And what he does, he breathes in really deeply. And it takes 1 billion years to breathe, or billions of years to make that breath. And that's what causes gravity, is him breathing in. And then eventually he'll blow the air out, and then we'll all be blown off the planet or something. And they say, well, if that's not right, then if that isn't, if our theory of gravity isn't right, how come we don't all fly off the Earth? Well, it's not that the quantum mechanics, the problem isn't the math, it's the explanation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what this is. Like, you can come up with these nonsensical explanations and say, well, we must be right because, look, people stay on the Earth. We know there's gravity, so it must be this giant at the center of the Earth. No, it's not. There's a giant at the, and quantum mechanics with their nonsensical explanations for what the math is coming up with is.
Well, like I said, I think a simpler what I like to say, and that I think that's a very good way to put it. Again, is if you have no model for the physicality of anything you're talking about, how can you do anything? How can you say, you're talking about a photon that's you're talking about light, where you have a light, you have a particle wave duality. You're talking about magnetic fields. They put a detector in and they say, oh, this is really crazy because you get these quantum eraser, history eraser scenarios, and all of this stuff. You can say that they're making bad explanations, but you can't do anything without a real physical model of anything. So how can you say what's happening in a double slit experiment if you have no idea what light, gravity, electron, any of that is? You don't have any idea. So what are you saying? So you're like you said, that you're making a absurd explanation. If you have a model, you can explain it. They don't have a model. They begin with assumptions, and then they make abstractions, and they never challenge whether their original assumption is right, and then they forget that the abstraction is simply something created in the brain, and it's not really what's to explain something. It's there's so many problems with the way that a lack of critical thinking. What is leading? Well, the problem is they don't state their assumptions, and not only that, when they don't state them, if you try to pin them down, you realize that their assumptions are paradoxical. That is, they'll say one thing, and then you pin them down. Okay, what is the assumption? You write it. Oh, wait a minute. You just said this. Now you're saying this. These two are in conflict. Well, they're contradictory. Like a paradox is sort of a nice way of saying contradiction, rather than say, when they talk about paradoxes, what they really mean is a contradiction in what they're talking about. Which, if there's a contradiction in a theory, throw the theory out. Because yeah. I mean, one of my most that invalidates any theory. With the minute I see a contradiction, whether they call it a paradox or not, it's a contradiction. Then that means the theory is wrong. That's invalid. My dad says, as an engineer, if you have a paradox in a circuit, it's wrong. You throw it out. And the other thing is, a good example of that is one of my videos has just shot up. People are really interested is on relativistic mass when I talk about that. Right. One of the problems is that we know in my film, we got a Stanford linear accelerator physicist stands in front of the camera and says mass increase is not observed. Of course, saying that, you have to throw a special relativity completely. But what do they say? Well, I had people in the comment area, they say, well, no, Dave, you don't understand. What happens is mass doesn't increase, but there's more momentum. Now, if you think about it, the only way you can get more momentum is to have mass. And so they ignore a problem they solve it with something that's wrong. I mean, it's not even two wrongs makes it right. It's almost two wrong. It's wrongs cubed makes makes it right.
Well, they
And
did
that,
that with Big Bang when it turned out that it was major problems were coming up. Goth, he's the inventor of it, came up with the idea of inflation to save the Big Bang. But the guy one of the people that originated the inflation has himself backed away from it. The idea of inflation,
yes,
where you get
yes.
the expansion of the universe at 1,000,000,000 times the speed of light and all this sort of nonsense. I mean, and then when they find problems with inflation, then they come up with other explanations to it. Rather than say the whole thing is nonsense, they keep just adjusting the theory. And I think if a theory needs to be constantly adjusted, there's something wrong there. And now the Big Bang Theory doesn't even look like the original one. They've made so many adjustments. I guess it's now called the Big Expansion Theory, or I don't know what they call it.
Yeah, it's a mess. And I think one of the things is that I say, and this is one of my hopes and why, I'm really hoping once, you get your book out there, and once this is moving along and you get your webcam, you need to start your own YouTube channel. And I will tell you, we are talking, in my opinion, and that's what I say again to all my subscribers, all the people that watch me. I tell them, I'm a voice for, in my opinion, you are a voice, and other people are a voice for what, in my opinion, is the majority voice. It's just that they're silent because the minority has so much power and has all this. They have this play. The game they play is this. These complicated things that are paradoxical, they set them up to make you look either dumb, or you have to go to the university and capitulate and pretend you understand them. That's the game they play.
It's the Emperor's New Clothes type analogy. You're familiar with the Emperor's New Clothes?
Everybody is, right?
Yeah, it's the same thing. I mentioned that in the book. That's what it's about. And even when people realize the Emperor's got no clothes, and the Emperor does, they still carry on with this. I mean, it's incredible.
Well, I think the other thing is I think one of the reasons I came and started doing this channel was because I noticed that after hanging out 25 years with all these amazing people, from my first mentor, which was Dr. Karazani, to the NPA, which is now the CMPS, and all those scientists, and hearing these things, and Borchart, and all these other people that have been extremely influential, and I've been listening to really good science for a long time outside of the mainstream. We have answers to things, even if the answer is we don't know, or even if the answer is they don't have a model and they're mixed up. What I've found in my last 5 to 10 years is that people I talk to who know me and are friends and want to get into the subject, they really like talking with me about it, not because I'm smart, but because I've hung out with these people and we actually have answers. We can tell them when their question is wrong, that the words they use are wrong. We can tell them when their concept has no concept and it's paradoxical. We can tell them, no, that's really not what's happening. We have people who found that problem, and here's a new solution. Oh, if there's no Big Bang, the first thing it says, what is there? Well, it's an eternal universe. I always give the people the idea, like, oh, don't you feel it very strange that we look up into the sky and we see the birth and death of stars? Now, why do we see that if something is supposed to be exploding out and sort of be, that doesn't even fit in? They go, that's right. Oh, then maybe the universe is infinite and eternal, and it's just changing, it's moving all the time. I found we had satisfactory answers to people's questions, whereas the person who doesn't live amongst the CMPS, doesn't live amongst the critical thinkers, and I have for 20 years, I've developed the answers, and answers from them, answers from my own self by questioning it, and then like yourself, myself, there are some of us, not all of us, who have the ability to, communicate this in a way that the general public can understand, just like your book. Now, I think we are at a place where we have the ability now with the technology to be the voice to those people. And the difference between you and me, George, and the average person who also thinks this is crazy is we actually have been around and thought about it and been with people who are great minds who have thought about it in the right ways, critical thinkers, and we actually have answers. What's so amazing about you, and you and I have that same ability, Glenn has as well, we can pick apart right away when a person starts talking to me. I go, wait a minute, let's just look at the words you're using because they're not making sense. And you start to explain that to them. Whereas another person two people who don't even look at that, they don't look at the language, they don't know the paradoxes, they'll say, oh, bad, 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 but they don't have any response. They don't know where it's wrong. So people like you should be out there with your voice as much as we can. Like myself here, let's just keep being the science therapist, as I say, and get them out of these bad habits because they're there already. Most people, I believe 99% or more of engineers and scientists are not theoreticians. They do not believe all this mumbo jumbo physics and all this stuff in quantum mechanics. They sometimes think, well, maybe I'm not smart enough, but inside they think this is mumbo jumbo. Wake me up when there's something better. And I think we now have, in the last 20, 30, 40 years, enough of us, myself, yourselves, other people that we know who we admire, now can help people understand where it's going wrong and point them in that direction. And I think that's what your book is really doing, don't you think?
Yes, something I'd like to mention to you is I connect with people who are in what you call more of the mainstream in addition to our group. And
Right.
one of them, whose name I won't mention, is very, very elite physicist.
Right.
You know, he's like 75 years of age, and he's Bohmian type. I won't mention his name.
Right,
But
that's okay.
because I don't know if I want to.
No, don't worry about it. Don't worry. It's not important.
He sent me a message through Facebook, because he's one of my Facebook friends. He says, I'm going to read your book with attention, because he saw my synopsis and everything.
Yes.
And so I'm saying, if people that are orthodox, you know, he's not, I guess Bohmians aren't completely orthodox, you know, but they're more mainstream, and he's impressed enough with it, he's going to read it with attention. Yes. That's saying something, and so that's what I'm trying to reach. I'm trying to reach people in every aspect, whether they're students, whether they're the general public, whether they're to say, look, this is something we all have to look at. Yes. And you know, I'd like to let you know something. Glenn put this on the back of the book. If you'd like to read what he said, if you'd like me to read it.
Yes, please.
Brian, who wrote, I'll give him a plug. He wrote the very excellent book, Disruptive Rewriting the Rules of Physics, which was a review of that. Yes, a great seller on Amazon. So Steve wrote on the back of the cover about my book, on the forefront of the next scientific revolution. George is amongst the first to embrace theories like modern mechanics, which outperforms Einstein's theory of relativity. George moves beyond the question of whether Einstein is right and instead begins answering, where do we go from here? He challenges the scientific worldview by introducing his own ideas while synthesizing thoughts, theories, and ideas of 21st century emerging physics. And then Glenn wrote on the back for me, he put, George has done a remarkable job interpreting univironmental determinism, neo-mechanics, and the assumption of infinity for those who are dubious about relativity, quantum mechanics, and the Big Bang Theory. Monumental efforts like this are just what it will take to finally rid humanity of the silly idea that the entire universe exploded out of nothing. So I think that's a good recommendation from them.
No, I know it is, and there's a lot of people out there doing this amazing work. I think the scientific worldview is one of those amazing works that I mean that's one of the stellar works that I've seen. Neo-mechanics blew my mind when I read the cycle theory.
Right.
The neo-mechanic part of it blew my mind, and the infinity part. My father and I picked up on that. You know, it's very different. I think there's real problems with ether. That's one of the things we're trying to address with that. And you know, so it's more important, I think, again, one of the important things I try to impress upon people is we need to have multiple voices out there. And one of the things is you can see if you got all this together, we agree on lots of things, and there are things that we have different approaches to. I mean, Glenn Borchart, he's an idol, a person whose shoulders I stand on, my father stand on for our book, Without Infinity. Our model doesn't exist. Yet
Right.
he doesn't believe in expansion tectonics because that's what he makes a living at. And that shows you within one person, one great person. I always joke with him because I know that's not easy for him because he has a profession. He makes his living off of that. And the models that he uses works well for his clients and all those things. But what's most important is having us all out there working together, even if we have differences, to still be out there and talk and show the world this isn't one person. This isn't just George. It's not just Steve Bryant. It's not just Glenn Borchart. It's not just David D. Hilster, not just Bob D. Hilster, and it's not all the rest. We need to keep building this course of a cacophony of real critical thinking, and we're not going to change. I don't want to say this, George, but you're not going to change any mainstream person's mind. But what you're going to do is you're going to challenge those people who are critical thinkers. And when we get enough of these people to turn, what happens is the paradigm shift happens.
Well, yeah, the mainstream people I'm dealing with do have a lot of critical thinking already within their sphere.
Right. Sure.
Like David Bohm when he came up with his ideas, it went completely against the standard model of quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
And that's the one I'm dealing with within mainly Bohm type school.
Right.
His ideas, which but I don't deal with the standard model and the Copenhagen interpretation. I mean that's complete non. Something that I solved in the book is you're familiar with the hard problem in consciousness that's puzzled people for thousands of years, and I think I came up with the solution for it.
Well, why don't you tell us about this? And here's what we're going to do. We're coming up to an hour, so I'm going to get us, because we can go on all night, and I will definitely have you back. But why don't you talk about that solution? I know you had I think you talked about that in your
well, I'll just give this. I'll just yeah.
Why don't you tell us? Why don't you give us and we'll wrap it up with that.
What I've got in the book is where I pose that the functioning brain is consciousness. And I account for the hard problem of subjective experience. That's what the hard problem is referring to. Subjective experience. I contend that microcosms in motion, that's like what's going on with your brain, the neurons and everything, that microcosms in motion generate perceptions which the brain interprets uniquely. Here's the solution to the hard problem. The brain interprets uniquely, each one of us interprets differently, based on the mind's neuronal patterns. Every human being's got their own neuronal pattern, way their neurons hook up and connect.
Yes.
I explain differences between awareness and consciousness, the cause of dualistic confusion. This is all caused by Descartes, I think therefore I am, and everything. And describe I don't know if you're familiar with the global workspace theory. I talk about that in the book. I list many questions about consciousness and the brain and provide logical answers. I discuss the illusion of the observer, the concept of self-awareness, Antonio Damasio's model. He's very big in terms of explaining the way the brain and everything works, and negative implications from brain studies on the ideas of free will. I totally blow that out of the water by saying they've got brain studies showing that the brain makes a decision before you're consciously even aware of it. And they can tell you what your decision is going to be by watching your brain activity. If you have to decide between A and B, when they see the brain saying signals to your right arm to activate it, you haven't even decided you're going to push the button on the right. Yeah. And the researchers said, "Oh, we know what you've decided." You say, "What do you mean? I'm still thinking about it." And it's like the ego comes up with the idea that it's.
Yeah, I know of those experiments.
And you know how I use that in my own life? I don't think I make decisions anymore. I just let the brain do it, and I don't worry about it. I literally do that when I have to decide between things.
Well,
No,
one of the things
the
is
brain is like it's the computer. It doesn't need input from the ego. It
right.
saves energy. I don't know. You're talking to me today. I'm very ill. I'm very sick with a cold, but the energy's still there. I think. I don't know if it comes across,
Of
but
course, no. You're a
it
very
keeps
energetic person.
the energy. No, I work like 16. I can be up 18, 16, 20 hours a day. The energy, because I'm not wasting energy on inner conflict. I'm not wasting energy. I'm making decisions constantly. When I'm talking to you now, I'm not deciding how I'm going to talk or what I'm going to. The brain is, you're just getting it straight from the brain.
Well, this is what Glenn Borchart talks about determinism, right?
Yeah.
He's
Oh, yeah,
we want to think
yeah,
that
exactly.
we
Right.
are choosing, that we are
Right.
changing, and that okay, like I'm sitting here now, the universe wanted me to do this, but I'm going to stop. I'm going to go over here. You were wanting me to go that. No, that's really hard for people. Again, I think
Yeah.
one of the things I would want to say to my audience for us to wrap up. This
Yeah.
is a great book, and it's a great book for a number of reasons. Number one, it really gives you a good history and overview of what critical thinkers are thinking now and what the problems are with mainstream science. So I think part of your book is just a good education before you get into a lot of your own arguments, and then you get into those, and you're one of those few people that can synthesize these things and communicate them. Some people aren't that way. My father's very detailed, and he does things that I'll never do, but when it comes to communicating, it's not as easy. So I think when people are going to read your book, they're going to not only get about the mind and consciousness and
Yeah.
all of these other things, but they're going to get how it all fits together. And not only that, it's threaded in some of the greatest people and greatest minds of our time. So you're not alone. And I want to just thank you so much again for coming on.
You want
The
websites that you can contact that people can reach?
Absolutely. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have all the contacts and everything below on
And
this
the new
in my
website. There's
yeah,
a new
all
website.
of those things, all of those things.
I'll email you the new website then about the.
George will be sending me everything. I will make sure I get all of those things underneath so that when this is going to come out very shortly. So as soon as we're done with this recording, I'm going to make sure I'll put all that information in while it's processing, getting up there to YouTube, so that when you see this, you have been seeing it, you'll see right down below all the things we're talking about. But I want to just thank you very much, George. You are just a kindred spirit. I think we are like, almost twins joined at the hip when it comes to a lot of things. I found certainly a kindred spirit in linguistic, Chomsky,
Oh,
infinity, the whole thing. And I think we have a really strong case for really moving forward, and I would recommend everybody take a look at this book and remember what I'm saying here. Don't expect yourself to understand all this right away. Give yourself time.
it's written in plain,
It
simple.
is, but it
There's
takes
no
time.
it's not
Yeah,
formulas. So, and I'm trying to write it in a way that the everyday person can get access to these ideas that physicists have been just talking about for the last 150 years by using simple language. And
right,
there's some humor in it when I talk about the nonsense that goes on in quantum mechanics.
right.
It's an
But give
enjoyable.
yourself time, and I'm not talking about that. You talk about it in very plain English, but the concept, like time is motion. It's
Yeah.
going to take a little time for
Oh,
people to
sure.
understand those. So we talk about it all the time, and I notice, wait a minute, oops, hold back,
Yeah.
and those are some of the things we're not talking. But thank you so much for
Uh,
coming on, and the best of luck. And again, all the information will be down below. So I'm going to sign off here, and like I
well,
said, remember. Did you want to make any
It's
quick
get it through
conclusion?
Amazon. It was number one on Amazon the first three for new releases in the category of systems theory, and then it dropped. The books that now there's two books ahead of it. They're both written by scientists and have got the mainstream big global publishers pushing their books, and that's the ones that are now ahead of me on the new releases, and they've been out since August 25th. But this book is getting good sales through Amazon right now.
Well, I think too, I think it's just going to be very timely, the book, so it's going to stay around for a while. But again, I recommend, is it an ebook form as well, or
On Amazon, it's got
Kindle?
there's Yeah, and the funny thing is, resellers now are charging an extra 19. You know, some of these sellers like Peach Media, Amazon's got it at $31.95. Peach Media is selling it at $50.95 because the demand must be there. And that's crazy. Usually they discount a book from the suggested price is $31.95. They got it above no, that's for paperback. They're marking it up above what the publishers suggest. So just get it straight from Amazon at $31.95 US. I don't know how Peach Media is getting away with charging an extra $20. It must be the demand must be there.
Well, I hope so. I really hope so. And I've bought books that are hardcover books on the same book, and it's actually more expensive the Kindle because that's more the popular now.
And these this is available in paperback. I didn't come out with a hardcover edition because I thought, well, that makes it too expensive.
No problem.
Don't need it, but it's a high quality paperback, very good quality, and beautiful picture of when people. I think you got it displayed on the. And the back cover's got some very beautiful pictures too.
And the front cover that I have is a special edition because it has your mug face, your face on it. So.
You put the Okay.
I put it right on there. So I just had, this is my channel. I can do what I want.
That's true. But people will not regret reading this book, and it can have a positive influence on how they see themselves in the universe.
Absolutely. I highly recommend it. Like I said, when I heard your talk, I thought, my gosh, this is the guy. If I were to have done this, this is what I would have done, because I think you just hit it on the head. It's real science, nothing fairy tale, no funny words, nothing like that.
It's just strict science. And when I've talked
on the ground.
Within 2 minutes of talking to people, I sold with 38 copies just by talking to people.
Hopefully we'll see your sales go up after this. My subscribers are going up, and with time, and these things stay on the web for a long time, and people read these. I mean, these videos get seen for months at a time. So thank you so much, and remember what I always say in Dissident Science: don't take what anyone says for granted. Stay critical, stay thinking. I'm your science therapist. I highly recommend, as your science therapist, to read this book. It is just chock full. It's one of those books you're not going to be able to read only once. It's going to be well worth it. And congratulations.
Thank you.
Ciao for now.
Bye-bye, David.
Bye-bye.